The hospital room smells like bleach and death. A mother stands frozen, staring at her daughter's limp body hooked to machines that beep with mechanical indifference. The doctor's words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "Mrs. Anderson, we found something in your daughter's blood. Something that shouldn't be there. Something someone put there deliberately." Her world shatters. Not from an accident, not from disease, from choice. Someone chose this. Someone she trusted. Someone she loved. Someone who slept beside her every night. And in that moment, standing in that sterile room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like dying insects, she realizes the monster wasn't hiding under the bed. The monster was in the bed, breathing softly, kissing her goodnight, poisoning her baby. Who could do this? Why would they do this? And how long had it been happening? The answers will destroy everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and family. Before we dive into this nightmare, and believe me, what you're about to hear will shake you to your core, I need you to do something. If stories about real evil, about the darkness that hides in plain sight, about justice and survival interest you, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel exposes the truth that others are too afraid to tell. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever trusted someone completely only to discover they were lying the entire time? Because that's exactly what happened here. Now let's go back to before the hospital, back to when life seemed normal, back to when Amanda Anderson thought she knew what happiness looked like. Amanda's story doesn't start with tragedy. It starts with hope, painful, desperate, beautiful hope. She was 32 when Emily was born, 32 years of waiting, wanting, praying for a child, 32 years of negative pregnancy tests, failed IVF attempts, and doctor's appointments that always ended the same way. I'm sorry, but the buts had piled up like gravestones in her heart. But your eggs aren't viable. But your uterus has scar tissue. But the chances are less than 5%. But you should consider adoption. But. And then, miracle of miracles. Emily, a positive test, a heartbeat on the ultrasound, 10 fingers, 10 toes, a cry that sounded like heaven's bells. Amanda held her daughter for the first time and sobbed so hard the nurses thought something was wrong. Nothing was wrong. For the first time in her entire adult life, something was right. But Emily wasn't like other babies. She didn't sleep through the night, not at 3 months, not at 6 months, not at a year. She screamed. God, how she screamed. Not the normal fussing of infants, but these gut-wrenching wails that sounded like agony. Amanda walked the floors every night, bouncing, shushing, singing, begging her daughter to just please sleep. The pediatrician said colic. Give it time. It'll pass. It didn't pass. By 18 months, Emily still wasn't walking steadily. She'd take a few wobbling steps and collapse. Her muscle tone was weak. Her eyes didn't focus right. She'd stare at nothing, her little face slack, like she was somewhere else entirely. Amanda kept a journal, obsessively. Every symptom, every episode, every tiny detail. March 3rd, Emily threw up 4 times today, refused to eat, temperature 99.1. March 10th. Took her to Dr. Phillips again. He says it's probably a virus. Gave us probiotics. March 18th. She's losing weight. I can see her ribs. Why can't anyone tell me what's wrong with my baby? The medical bills piled up like accusations. Specialist after specialist. Neurologist, gastroenterologist, immunologist. Every doctor had a different theory. None had answers. Maybe it's a metabolic disorder. Maybe it's a genetic condition. Maybe it's developmental delays. Maybe. Amanda stopped working. How could she work when her daughter was dying by inches? Because that's what it felt like. Watching Emily fade, watching her energy drain away, watching her little body betray her. The isolation was suffocating. Other mothers at the playground would chat about milestones, first words, first steps, potty training. Amanda would smile and nod and say nothing about how her 2-year-old could barely hold her head up, how she'd started having seizures, How Amanda had found her blue and unresponsive on the bathroom floor last Tuesday? She carried Emily everywhere. To appointments, to the grocery store, to the park where she'd sit on benches and watch other children run and play while her daughter lay listless in her arms. And through it all, through every sleepless night, every terrifying hospital visit, every moment she thought she might shatter from exhaustion and fear, Amanda never gave up. She fought. She researched. She demanded second opinions and third opinions and fourth opinions. Because that's what mothers do. They fight. They endure. They sacrifice everything for their children. Amanda didn't know she was fighting the wrong enemy. She didn't know the danger wasn't some mysterious illness lurking in Emily's blood. The danger was sleeping beside her, making her coffee in the morning, kissing Emily goodnight. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you discovered your child's illness wasn't random, that someone was causing it? Because Amanda was about to find out, and the answer would nearly kill her. His name was David, David Porter, and everyone loved David. He had one of those faces that invited trust, open, friendly, with smile lines around his eyes and a laugh that sounded genuine, because it was genuine. David loved to laugh. He laughed at sitcoms, at jokes his coworkers told, at himself when he made mistakes. He was the kind of man who helped elderly neighbors carry groceries, who remembered birthdays, who volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. Amanda met him at a support group for parents of medically complex children. His son from a previous relationship had childhood leukemia. He died at age 7, 3 years before David and Amanda met. David spoke about it with such raw honesty, such visible pain, that Amanda's heart broke for him. They bonded over loss, over fear, over the exhaustion that comes from loving someone whose body is betraying them. David understood when Emily had bad days. He understood when Amanda was too tired for conversation, when she needed to cancel plans last minute, when she broke down crying in the middle of Target because she was just so tired and scared and alone. He never made her feel guilty, never complained, never asked for more than she could give. Take your time, he'd say, rubbing her shoulders while she cried. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together. After 6 months of dating, he moved in. It made sense financially. Amanda's medical bills were crushing, her savings depleted. David had a good job as a medical device sales representative. He traveled sometimes, but mostly he worked from home. He could help with Emily. He could give Amanda a break. And he did help. God, he helped so much. He learned Emily's medications, the names, the doses, the schedules. He could mix her formula with his eyes closed. He'd take the night shift sometimes, letting Amanda sleep for the first time in years. He'd hold Emily during her seizures, calm and steady, while Amanda fell apart. He was good with her, patient, gentle. He'd read her stories in funny voices, play peekaboo even though she barely responded, sing lullabies in his off-key baritone. She's going to get better, he'd tell Amanda with such conviction. We're going to figure this out, I promise. Amanda believed him. How could she not? He was everything she needed, strong where she was weak, hopeful when she despaired, present when she felt completely alone. Her friends loved him. Her mother loved him. Even Emily's doctors commented on what a devoted stepfather he was, how lucky Amanda was to have found someone willing to take on such a challenging situation. He proposed on Emily's 3rd birthday. Nothing fancy, just the two of them in the hospital room where Emily was recovering from another episode. He knelt beside her bed, pulled out a simple ring and said, I want to be your family, officially, forever. Amanda said yes. Of course she said yes. David had saved her. David had given her hope when she had none left. David loved Emily like she was his own daughter, or so she thought. There were little things, tiny inconsistencies Amanda's exhausted brain didn't catch. How Emily always seemed worse after David gave her medication. How she'd improved slightly during his business trips. How David was always the one to suggest increasing doses or trying new supplements. But these weren't red flags to Amanda. They were just coincidences, randomness, the chaos of chronic illness. David documented everything meticulously. He kept detailed logs of Emily's symptoms, her food intake, her sleep patterns. He filmed her episodes on his phone. For the doctors, he'd explain, so they can see what we're dealing with. Amanda thought it was responsible, thorough, the mark of a man who truly cared. She didn't realize she was watching a predator study his prey. The unraveling started small. So small, Amanda almost didn't notice. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September. The air had that crisp autumn bite, and Amanda was folding laundry while Emily napped. David's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Amanda glanced at it reflexively. The screen was locked, but the preview was visible. Download complete. Introduction to Pharmacology, dear PDF. Download complete. Benzodiazepines and their effects, PDF. Download complete. Undetectable Poisons, a medical guide PDF. Her hands froze mid-fold. A t-shirt hung limply from her fingers. Why would David be downloading files about poisons? She stared at the phone for a long moment, her brain trying to construct an innocent explanation. Maybe it was for work. He sold medical devices. Perhaps he needed to understand drug interactions. Maybe it was research for... what? What innocent reason explained downloading a document about undetectable poisons? The phone screen went dark. Amanda finished folding the laundry. She didn't mention the notifications when David came home. She told herself she was being paranoid, tired. Her anxiety was making her see threats that didn't exist. But she started noticing other things. How David always insisted on preparing Emily's medication himself. "You do so much," he'd say. "Let me handle this." How he'd sometimes give Emily her medicine when Amanda was in another room, even though they'd always done it together before. How he'd gotten defensive last week when Amanda asked why he'd increased Emily's anticonvulsant dose without telling her. "I told you," he'd snapped, then immediately softened. "Sorry, I'm tired." "Yes, I told you. Remember? Last Thursday? You were upset about the insurance bill, and I mentioned Dr. Reynolds recommended increasing it." Had he told her? Amanda's memory was Swiss cheese from exhaustion. Maybe he had. Maybe she'd forgotten. But the doubt had sprouted roots. She started watching him more carefully. Not obviously, just paying attention. She noticed how Emily's worst episodes happened within an hour of David giving her medication. She noticed how David seemed almost excited when Emily had a particularly bad day, how he'd immediately start filming, documenting, calling doctors. She noticed how he'd scroll through medical websites late at night, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his laptop, his expression intense and focused. One night, she pretended to be asleep and watched him through slitted eyes. He sat at the edge of their bed, Emily's medical chart open on his lap. He was adding notes, but his handwriting was too small to read from her position. He looked up suddenly, as if sensing her gaze. Amanda forced her breathing to stay deep and even. After a moment, David closed the chart and slipped back under the covers, his body warm against hers. She lay there in the darkness, her heart pounding, and thought, "I'm losing my mind." This is what sleep deprivation does. It makes you paranoid. It makes you suspicious of the person you love. But what if she wasn't paranoid? What if the person she loved was the reason Emily was dying? Drop a comment right now. Have you ever had a gut feeling something was wrong, but everyone told you that you were crazy? Did you listen to your instinct or ignore it? The incident that changed everything happened 3 weeks later. Amanda had the flu, real, honest-to-God influenza that left her feverish and weak. David insisted she stay in bed while he cared for Emily. "Don't worry," he said, bringing her soup and medicine. "I've got everything under control." Amanda dozed fitfully, fever dreams mixing with half-waking worry. She heard Emily crying at one point, heard David's soothing voice, then silence. She woke in the late afternoon to an empty house. Panic seized her. Where were they? She grabbed her phone, 7 missed calls from David, 3 voicemails she'd slept through. The first voicemail. "Amanda, Emily's having a seizure. I'm taking her to the hospital. Don't worry, I've got her." The second. "We're in the ER. They're running tests. Call me when you get this." The third. "They're admitting her. Room 412. Hurry." Amanda drove to the hospital in her pajamas, shaking so hard she could barely grip the steering wheel. She found them in a private room. Emily was unconscious, an IV in her tiny arm. David sat beside the bed, his head in his hands. the picture of a devastated father. "What happened?" Amanda demanded. David looked up, his eyes red. "I don't know. I gave her the morning meds, and an hour later she just collapsed, started seizing. I couldn't stop it." A doctor entered, Dr. Yosef Abadi, according to his badge. Young, serious, with dark circles under his eyes. "Mrs. Anderson," he said, "we need to talk." Dr. Abadi closed the door. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Mrs. Anderson, Mr. Porter?" he began, his voice carefully neutral. "Emily's blood work came back. We found several concerning substances." Amanda's heart stopped. "Substances? What kind of substances?" Dr. Abadi glanced at David, then back to Amanda. "Benzodiazepines, specifically lorazepam and diazepam, in quantities far exceeding any prescribed amount." The room tilted. Amanda grabbed the edge of Emily's bed to steady herself. "That's not possible. Emily isn't prescribed any benzodiazepines." "I know," Dr. Abadi said quietly. "That's why we've contacted the police." The words hung in the air like toxic gas. "Police? Why would they contact the police unless—" "You think we drugged her?" Amanda's voice came out as a whisper. "You think we poisoned our daughter?" "I'm not making any accusations," Dr. Abadi said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "However, given the levels in her system, these medications had to come from somewhere. They didn't appear spontaneously. Someone administered them." Amanda turned to David. He'd gone pale, his hands trembling. "This is insane," he said. "We would never, I would never." "We'll need to speak with both of you separately," Dr. Abadi continued. "And I've called Child Protective Services. They'll be conducting an investigation." The next hours blurred into a nightmare of questions and accusations. A detective arrived. Detective Lisa Kowalski, middle-aged and sharp-eyed. She separated Amanda and David, taking Amanda to a small consultation room that smelled like coffee and fear. "Tell me about Emily's medical history," Kowalski said, her pen poised over a notepad. Amanda talked until her throat was raw. Every doctor's visit, every emergency room trip, every medication, every symptom, every sleepless night wondering if her daughter would survive. "Who has access to Emily's medications?" Kowalski asked. "Both of us, me and David. But we keep them locked in the bathroom cabinet." "Who administers them?" "We both do, usually together, but sometimes David does it if I'm busy or sleeping or—" Amanda stopped. A cold realization crept over her skin like frost. "He's been giving her medicine alone more often lately. He says it's to give me a break." Kowalski wrote something down. "Has Emily's condition worsened recently?" "Yes, significantly. Over the past 6 months, she's been having more seizures, more vomiting episodes, more—" Amanda trailed off. 6 months. David had moved in 8 months ago. No, she was being paranoid. She loved David. David loved Emily. But that phone notification about poisons. The late-night research. The way Emily always got worse after David gave her medication. "Mrs. Anderson?" Kowalski's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "I need to ask you something directly. Is it possible David has been harming Emily?" The question detonated in Amanda's brain. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't... He wouldn't..." But she couldn't finish the sentence, because deep down, in a place she'd been refusing to look, she knew. God help her, she knew. "I need to check his laptop," Amanda said suddenly. "His phone, his things. I need to see—" "We're already obtaining a warrant," Kowalski said. "But I need you to tell me, are you involved in this?" Amanda's head snapped up. "What? No, I would never hurt my daughter. She's everything to me. She's—" Her voice broke. "She's all I have." Kowalski's expression softened slightly. "I believe you, but I had to ask. Want to know what the police found on David's devices? Subscribe now, because what comes next will make you question every relationship you've ever had. And comment below. At what point would you have suspected something was wrong? They kept Amanda at the hospital, not under arrest, not exactly, but not free to leave either. She sat in a waiting room while police processed the scene, while they questioned David, while they tore apart the life she'd built. She called her mother, sobbing so hard she could barely form words. "Mom, they think we hurt Emily. They think someone's been poisoning her. Oh my God, Amanda, where's David? I don't know. They separated us. Mom, what if it's him? What if he's been—" She couldn't say it out loud. Saying it out loud would make it real. Hours passed. Amanda stared at the wall, her mind replaying every moment with David. Every kind gesture, every gentle touch, every promise. Had it all been lies? Detective Kowalski returned near midnight. Her expression was grim. "Mrs. Anderson, we've executed the search warrant on your home and Mr. Porter's vehicle. I need to show you something." She placed an evidence bag on the table. Inside was a bottle labeled lorazepam 2 milligrams, a prescription bottle with David's name on it. "Do you recognize this?" Kowalski asked. Amanda shook her head. "David never told me he was prescribed lorazepam. He said he didn't take any medications. This prescription was filled 6 months ago. 60 tablets, 30-day supply with 1 refill. The bottle should be empty or nearly empty if he'd been taking them as prescribed." Kowalski placed another evidence bag on the table. Another bottle, and another, and another. 5 bottles total, all prescribed to David, all still nearly full. "If he wasn't taking them," Amanda whispered, "then where did they go?" Kowalski's silence was answer enough. "We also found these in his car." She produced printed pages in plastic sleeves, medical research articles, forms about Munchausen syndrome by proxy, step-by-step guides on how to induce seizures, how to mimic metabolic disorders, how to poison someone slowly enough that doctors would assume natural illness. Amanda's stomach lurched. She was going to vomit. She was going to scream. She was going to— "There's more," Kowalski said quietly. "We found a journal, a detailed log of every time he gave Emily medication, every symptom he induced, every doctor he manipulated. He documented everything, Mrs. Anderson. Everything." The room spun. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. "Why?" Amanda choked out. "Why would he do this?" Kowalski shook her head. "We're still trying to determine motive, but based on his internet history and the journal entries, it appears Mr. Porter has Munchausen syndrome by proxy. He was making Emily sick to receive attention and sympathy, to play the role of the devoted caregiver. He was killing her," Amanda said flatly. "He was killing my daughter for attention?" "We believe Emily would have died within months if this had continued. Her organs were beginning to fail." The words landed like physical blows. Months. Emily had months before David's poison would have succeeded, and Amanda had loved him, trusted him, let him into their home, let him near her daughter. She'd welcomed the monster in and given it a key. They let Amanda see David once more before they arrested him. She insisted. She needed to look him in the face and understand how she'd been so blind. They brought him to the same consultation room, a police officer standing by the door. David's hands were cuffed in front of him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, the mask of the devoted partner finally stripped away. He met her eyes and smiled. Smiled, like they were meeting for coffee, like he hadn't just been caught poisoning her child. "Amanda," he started. "Don't." Her voice was cold. Dead. "Don't say my name. Don't speak to me like you know me. Like you ever knew me." His smile faltered. "You don't understand. Then explain it to me." She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table between them. "Explain why you've been poisoning my daughter for 8 months. Explain why you filled prescriptions you never intended to take. Explain the journal where you documented every time you made her seize, every time you made her vomit, every time you brought her to the edge of death. It wasn't like that. Explain it to me," Amanda screamed. The officer shifted but didn't intervene. "Make me understand how the man who held me while I cried, who promised to love Emily like his own, who proposed in her hospital room could do this. Make it make sense." David's expression shifted. The kindness drained away, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You want the truth? Fine. You were so desperate, Amanda. So pathetically desperate for help, for someone to share the burden. It was easy. You barely asked questions. You just accepted everything I did because you were too tired to think critically. The words cut like razors, because they were true. She had been desperate. She had accepted his help without question. Emily was my ticket, he continued, his voice matter of fact. Do you know how much sympathy a man gets when he's caring for a sick child that isn't even his? Do you know how many people praised me, admired me? My coworkers donated to Emily's medical fund. My family called me a saint. Everyone loved me for being such a good man. She almost died, Amanda whispered. My baby almost died because you wanted people to think you were good? She wasn't going to die. I was careful. I controlled the doses, monitored her symptoms. I knew exactly how far I could push before real damage occurred. The clinical detachment in his voice was more horrifying than rage would have been. He talked about poisoning Emily like it was a science experiment, a project, something to be managed and optimized. And what about when Emily recovered? What then? Amanda asked, even though she already knew the answer. David shrugged. New symptoms would have developed. Different medications would have been needed. The cycle continues. As long as she was sick, I was necessary. I was the hero. You sick son of a... Oh, don't act so righteous, David snapped. You got something out of this too. You got help. You got to sleep through the night. You got a partner who understood your precious burden. You were happy to look the other way as long as I was useful. I didn't know, Amanda shouted. I trusted you. I loved you. You loved what I represented. Security, support, a father figure for Emily. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of not being alone. Maybe that was true. Maybe she had been so desperate for help that she'd ignored warning signs. Maybe she'd chosen to believe his lies because the alternative was too terrible to consider. But that didn't make this her fault. That didn't justify what he'd done. I hope you rot, Amanda said quietly. I hope every single day in prison you remember what you did to an innocent child. I hope it haunts you. I hope you never know a moment's peace. David laughed. Actually laughed. You think I'll be convicted? It's your word against mine, Amanda. Who's to say you weren't the one poisoning Emily? After all, you had access to the medications too. You were always the primary caregiver. Maybe you have Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Maybe I discovered what you were doing and you're trying to frame me. Ice flooded Amanda's veins. Would people believe that? Would a jury? But then she remembered. The prescriptions were in his name. The journal was in his handwriting. The internet history was on his devices. They have evidence, she said. Everything you did, every sick thing you documented, they have it all. For the first time, David's confidence wavered. That journal was private. They had no right. They had every right when they suspected child abuse. Amanda stood. You're going to prison, David. You're going to pay for what you did. And I'm going to make sure Emily knows exactly what kind of monster you are, so she never doubts that leaving you behind was the best thing that ever happened to her. Emily won't remember me, David said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. She's too young. Then I'll remind her every single day if I have to. Amanda turned to leave. David called after her. I never hurt her. I kept her alive. I could have killed her at any time, but I didn't. I saved her. She didn't look back. She walked out of that room and never saw David Porter again. But his words followed her, haunted her, because part of what he said was true. She had been so desperate for help that she'd ignored her instincts. She'd let him in. She'd failed to protect her daughter. And that guilt would be a weight she'd carry forever. The next 72 hours were a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, and devastating revelations. Forensic analysts tore through David's electronics like archaeologists excavating a crime scene. What they found painted a picture of calculated cruelty that made Amanda's blood run cold. Detective Kowalski sat across from her in the same consultation room, now covered in evidence photos and printed documents. We've reconstructed a timeline, Kowalski said. It's extensive, and it's damning. The first entry in David's journal was dated 3 weeks after he moved in. Day 1 of intervention. Administered 0.5 millimicrogram lorazepam mixed into evening medication. Subject showed increased drowsiness within 40 minutes. Amanda noticed nothing. Videotaped episode for records. Amanda's hands shook as she read. Subject. He'd called Emily a subject, like she was a lab rat, something to be experimented on. The entries continued, page after page, documenting 8 months of systematic abuse. Day 23. Increased dose to 1 mg. Subject experienced mild seizure activity. Amanda called pediatrician. Appointment scheduled for Friday. Perfect opportunity to demonstrate symptoms. Day 47. Introduced diazepam alongside lorazepam. Subject vomited 3 times. Amanda, very distressed, comforted her. She told me I'm the only thing keeping her sane. Gratifying. Day 89. ER visit successful. Dr. Martinez ordered full neurological workup. Amanda crying. Held her while she slept. She depends on me completely now. On and on and on. A clinical record of torture disguised as caregiving. There are over 200 entries, Kowalski said. He documented every dose, every symptom, every medical appointment. He tracked Emily's weight loss, her developmental regression, her organ function. He knew exactly what he was doing. How did the doctors not catch this? Amanda asked, her voice hollow. How did no one see it? Because he was smart. He varied the doses. He created patterns that mimicked legitimate conditions. And he was always there, the concerned stepfather, providing detailed medical histories and symptom logs. Doctors trusted him because he seemed so knowledgeable and invested. Kowalski pulled out another document. This is from his internet history. Searches dating back 10 months, before he even moved in with you. Amanda scanned the list. How to induce seizures without detection. Benzodiazepine overdose symptoms, children, Munchausen by proxy, successful cases. How long before organ damage from medication? Do hospitals test for all drugs and blood work? He'd been planning this, researching, preparing. Long before Emily became his victim, he'd been studying how to do it. We found something else, Kowalski said carefully, something that changes the scope of this case significantly. She laid out a series of photographs, medical records, death certificate. David's son, Ryan Porter, he died of childhood leukemia, correct? Amanda nodded. 3 years before I met David, he said it was the worst experience of his life. We obtained Ryan's medical records through the FBI. Amanda, Ryan never had leukemia. The room tilted. What? Ryan had mysterious, unexplained symptoms that doctors couldn't diagnose. Seizures, vomiting, developmental delays. Sound familiar? Oh God, no. Ryan died from complications of his condition, Kowalski continued. But looking at the symptoms, the timeline, the medical records, we believe David was poisoning him too. We believe David killed his own son. Amanda couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was hearing. He killed Ryan, she whispered. Then he found me and Emily and started over. We weren't his first victims. We were his second try. We're working with the medical examiner in David's previous jurisdiction to potentially exhume Ryan's body. If we find evidence of chronic drug exposure, David will face murder charges in addition to the charges related to Emily. Murder. He was a murderer, and Amanda had let him into their home, had slept beside him, had nearly married him. If you're still watching, I need you to understand something. These monsters don't look like monsters. They look like helpers, like saviors, like answered prayers. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you're notified when I post, because I'm going to show you exactly how to recognize predators hiding in plain sight. Comment below. What warning signs did you notice that Amanda missed? The medical evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Rachel Nguyen, a toxicologist from the state crime lab, testified to the police about her findings. Amanda sat through the presentation, forcing herself to hear every word, every terrible detail. Emily Anderson's hair samples show chronic exposure to lorazepam and diazepam over an 8-month period, Dr. Nguyen explained, pointing to charts and graphs. The levels varied significantly from week to week, consistent with intentional dosing rather than accidental exposure. We also found evidence of sodium chloride poisoning, essentially salt poisoning, which would explain the dehydration and electrolyte imbalances Emily experienced. This is a common method in Munchausen by proxy cases because it's difficult to detect and causes dramatic symptoms. Amanda learned that Emily's seizures weren't from epilepsy. They were drug-induced. Her vomiting wasn't from a metabolic disorder. It was from being systematically poisoned. Her developmental delays weren't genetic. They were from months of brain damage caused by benzodiazepines and electrolyte imbalances. Everything Emily had suffered, every terrifying symptom, every hospital stay, every moment of pain, had been caused deliberately by a man who claimed to love her. The good news, Dr. Nguyen said, is that now that Emily is no longer being exposed to these substances, we expect significant improvement. Children are remarkably resilient. With proper care, she should recover much of her lost development. Will she be normal? Amanda asked. Dr. Nguyen hesitated. Normal is a complicated word. She may have some lingering effects, potential learning disabilities, possible motor coordination issues. But she's young. Her brain is still developing. With early intervention, therapy, and a safe environment, I'm optimistic about her prognosis. Amanda clung to that word. Optimistic. After 8 months of watching her daughter fade, optimism felt like oxygen. But there was another question burning in her mind. Why didn't anyone suspect abuse sooner? Kowalski fielded that one. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is difficult to detect because the perpetrator is usually highly credible. David was educated, articulate, and appeared deeply committed to Emily's care. He provided detailed medical information. He attended every appointment. He advocated for tests and treatments. Doctors are trained to trust caregivers unless there's obvious evidence of abuse, and David was careful never to leave obvious evidence. He didn't bruise Emily. He didn't break bones. He poisoned her with medications that could be explained away as accidental overdose or mismanagement. It's a perfect crime in many ways, Kowalski continued. The victim is too young to articulate what's happening. The perpetrator appears to be the hero. And the medical community is so focused on finding organic causes that they don't consider intentional harm. Until something triggers suspicion. In your case, it was the benzodiazepines. Emily wasn't prescribed them, so there was no legitimate reason for them to be in her system. That's what broke the case. Amanda thought about how close they'd come. If David had been just slightly more careful, if he'd chosen different drugs, if Emily had died before anyone suspected, she would have mourned him. She would have grieved alongside the man who'd murdered her daughter. She might have married him. The thought made her physically ill. David Porter was charged with 47 counts of child abuse, 23 counts of poisoning, 11 counts of assault, and 1 count of attempted murder. His trial began 6 months after his arrest. Amanda sat through every day of it, forcing herself to witness every piece of evidence, every testimony, every moment of truth. The prosecution was led by Deputy District Attorney James Thornton, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a voice like gravel. He laid out the case methodically, piece by devastating piece. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Thornton began in his opening statement, this is not a complicated case. It is, however, a disturbing one. Over the course of 8 months, David Porter systematically poisoned a 3-year-old child. Not because he hated her, not because she'd wronged him, but because her suffering brought him attention, sympathy, and admiration. He kept a journal documenting his crimes. He researched his methods online. He filmed his victims' distress. And he did all of this while pretending to be a devoted caregiver, a loving stepfather, a pillar of support for a struggling mother. The evidence is overwhelming. The defendant's own words will convict him. All we ask is that you listen, that you see the truth, and that you hold this man accountable for the torture he inflicted on an innocent child. David's defense attorney was Melanie Chen, a sharp woman with steel gray eyes who'd built a career on defending the indefensible. Her strategy became clear immediately. My client is not a monster, she said in her opening statement. He's a sick man, a man suffering from severe mental illness, Munchausen syndrome by proxy, that compelled him to act in ways that he himself doesn't fully understand. Yes, David Porter harmed Emily Anderson. We don't dispute the facts. But the question before you isn't whether harm occurred. It's whether David Porter is criminally responsible for actions driven by a documented psychiatric disorder. David Porter needs treatment, not punishment. He needs psychiatric care, not a prison cell. Justice doesn't mean vengeance. Justice means recognizing when someone's mental illness has overwhelmed their capacity for rational thought. Amanda wanted to scream. He was sick? He needed treatment? He documented his crimes like a scientist. He'd researched his methods. He'd manipulated doctors and police and everyone around him with calculated precision. That wasn't mental illness. That was evil wearing a diagnosis as a disguise. The prosecution called witness after witness. Dr. Abadi testified about finding benzodiazepines in Emily's blood, about the levels being consistent with deliberate overdose rather than accidental exposure. Detective Kowalski walked the jury through the evidence, the prescriptions, the journal, the internet searches, the videos David had filmed of Emily's worst moments. Dr. Nguyen explained the toxicology, the pattern of exposure, the certainty that this was intentional poisoning. Emily's previous pediatricians testified about David's presence at appointments, his detailed symptom reports, his suggestions for treatment. One doctor broke down on the stand saying, "I trusted him. I believed him. I never suspected." "None of us suspected," Thornton said gently, "because the defendant was extraordinarily skilled at deception. But the most damning testimony came from Dr. Leonard Isaacson, a forensic psychiatrist who'd evaluated David. "Mr. Porter does not meet the clinical criteria for Munchausen syndrome by proxy as a primary diagnosis," Dr. Isaacson stated. "While he exhibits some features consistent with the disorder, his presentation is more complex. During my evaluation, Mr. Porter displayed significant antisocial traits, lack of empathy, manipulativeness, calculated deception. He expressed no genuine remorse for his actions. Instead, he attempted to rationalize them, to portray himself as the victim of circumstance. In my professional opinion, Mr. Porter knew his actions were wrong. He understood the consequences. He chose to proceed anyway because the benefits, attention, sympathy, control, outweighed his concern for his victim's welfare. This is not impaired judgment from mental illness. This is conscious choice." The defense fought back hard. They called their own psychiatric expert, Dr. Howard Klein, who testified that David suffered from severe attachment disorder, complex PTSD from losing his first son, and Munchausen syndrome by proxy. David Porter's actions were driven by an uncontrollable compulsion to recreate the caregiver role he'd lost when Ryan died, Dr. Klein explained. He was essentially re-traumatizing himself and the child in an attempt to process his unresolved grief. This doesn't excuse his behavior, but it explains it. This is a man who needs intensive psychiatric treatment, not incarceration. Under cross-examination, Thornton tore into Dr. Klein's testimony. "Dr. Klein, you testified that the defendant has attachment disorder and PTSD. Does that explain the detailed journal where he documented his crimes? It could be part of a compulsive pattern. Does attachment disorder cause someone to research undetectable poisons? Not directly, but does PTSD cause someone to film their victim's suffering? It's possible that, Doctor, isn't it true that the defendant displayed none of the typical markers of genuine remorse during your evaluation? That he attempted to blame the victim's mother? That he showed more concern for his own legal situation than for the child he abused?" Dr. Klein hesitated. "Yes, and doesn't that suggest not mental illness, but conscious calculation? Not compulsion, but choice?" "Objection," Chen called. "Argumentative." "Sustained," the judge ruled, but the damage was done. The jury had heard enough. Amanda testified on day 4. She'd been dreading it, but Thornton had insisted her testimony was crucial. "Tell the jury about David Porter," Thornton said gently. "When you met him, who did you think he was?" Amanda's voice shook as she spoke. "I thought he was a good man, a kind man, someone who understood what I was going through because he'd lost a child too." "Did you have any reason to suspect he was harming Emily?" "No, none. He was so good with her, so patient. I thought," her voice cracked, "I thought he loved her." "When did you first start having doubts?" Amanda told them about the phone notifications, the late-night research, the way Emily's symptoms worsened after David administered medication. "But I didn't want to believe it," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I was so tired. so desperate for help. I think part of me knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to see it because that would mean I was alone again. Mrs. Anderson, do you blame yourself for what happened to Emily? Amanda looked directly at the jury. Every day, every hour. I should have protected her. I should have seen the warning signs. I failed her as a mother. But David Porter is the one who poisoned her, correct? Yes. David Porter is the one who chose to harm a child in his care? Yes. You didn't know. You couldn't have known because he was actively deceiving you, deceiving doctors, deceiving everyone? Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. No further questions. Chen's cross-examination was brutal. Mrs. Anderson, you testified that you had doubts about my client. Why didn't you act on those doubts? I thought I was being paranoid. Or were you complicit, willing to look the other way as long as you were receiving help? Objection, Thornton roared. The witness is not on trial here. Sustained. Counselor, tread carefully. But Chen had planted the seed. Amanda could see it in the jurors' faces. The question, the doubt. Was she involved? Mrs. Anderson, you had just as much access to Emily's medications as my client, correct? Yes, but you were the primary caregiver? Yes. You stood to benefit from Emily's illness. Sympathy, attention, financial donations from the community? Amanda's vision went red. I never wanted my daughter to be sick. I would have given anything for her to be healthy. And yet you allowed my client into your home, into your daughter's life. You trusted him with her care. Isn't it possible that you're now blaming him for your own failures? That's not... I didn't... No further questions. Amanda left the stand shaking, humiliated, destroyed. Had she failed Emily? Was this her fault? But then she remembered David's journal, his internet searches, his prescriptions. The evidence didn't lie, even if he did. Still watching? Good, because what I'm about to tell you about the verdict will either restore your faith in justice or destroy it completely. Subscribe now and drop a comment. Do you think Amanda bears any responsibility for what happened? The trial lasted 3 weeks. The closing arguments were fierce. Thornton reminded the jury of the evidence. David Porter's own words convict him. His journal, his searches, his prescriptions. He planned this. He executed it. He documented it.